Looking for information about candidates or would-be candidates for November's election of a Police and Crime Commissioner for Sussex, I was not pleased to find that the only quasi-official source of information seems to be a website run by Sussex Police Authority, which has for months been steadfastly opposed to the very idea of a police commissioner, and which has to date published no information whatever about a single candidate or would-be candidate, though other authority web pages do have information and webcasts featuring the first of these, who has been a member of that underperforming authority for years. The local press has been more helpful, though providing less information than would be needed for me to vote for any of them. This video records information that I've gathered so far from local papers about the second and third would-be candidates for the post, and video snippets featuring the second. Normally, white-collar jobs require a detailed curriculum vitae, and for a government-type job, the government's own advice about CVs should be applicable.
A CV is a short list of facts about you and your work history, skills and experience. A good CV is essential when looking for work. As to length, 2 sides of a sheet of A4 paper is normally enough. There is no set format, however you should include at least the following: your name, address, phone number, email address if you have one, and your career history. Put your most recent job first and include dates. Employers will be more interested in what you have done recently. Don't leave gaps between dates because employers will want to know what you did during those periods. New laws on age discrimination mean that you do not need to put your date of birth or your age on your CV. Include any qualifications and training from previous jobs, for example, training in health and safety, or a certificate in food hygiene. Put the most recent first and include qualifications you got from school or college. So, how do the candidates for this job measure up so far against government guidelines? Councillor Jones, the first would-be candidate, featured in other recent videos of mine, so I'll move on to the third and second aspirants. How do they measure up so far against the government guidelines when applying for a job? On the 14th of February 2012, the online Argus published a picture and announced Brighton Street pastor to stand for Sussex Police Commissioner role. A street pastor wants to stand for Police and Crime Commissioner for Sussex. Ian Chisnell is the first person to declare his interest in being an independent candidate for the role. Mr. Chisnell describes himself as a community activist and a faith-based social entrepreneur. He warned that policing could become politicised if the traditional parties take control of individual forces. Presumably Chisnell knows that for years police authorities have by law needed to have a majority of elected councillors, and that all Sussex Police Authority councillor members claim allegiance to established political parties. Mr. Chisnell warned that dozens of police forces could be controlled by political parties whose policies contradicted those of the government of the day. Presumably Chisnell knows that in June 2001 the Home Secretary felt it necessary to tell the complacent Sussex Police Authority that the Chief Constable should be sacked. It was the government which on behalf of the people rightly took responsibility for the police when necessary, and I doubt whether that position has in law changed during the last decade. The 51-year-old from Hollingdean coordinates Brighton Street pastors, whose members help people in distress in the city centre on Friday and Saturday nights. So, if you are a Sussex voter and think experience of helping drunks is a good qualification for a police commissioner, perhaps Chisnell is your man. He is asking for donations to raise the £5,000 he needs for a deposit. Successful entrepreneurs would normally have such petty cash readily available, but I suppose faith-based social entrepreneurs may be relying on treasure hereafter, for which no promissory note would be likely to produce cash in hand. The second would-be candidate to announce his interest received more generous coverage in his local paper. On the 20th of January 2012, the Eastbourne Herald gave him half a page. An Eastbourne father of two is the first candidate in Sussex to declare his intention to run for the office of Police and Crime Commissioner. No, the Argus had a story headlined, Council Leader Bids for Sussex Police Job on the 21st of October 2011. Paul Richards, 44, who lives Summerdown Road, is seeking the Labour Party nomination for the new post, which will be elected in November. No, he presumably lives in the road, and if all goes well, a candidate will be elected, not the post. The definite article before nomination is interesting because it implies that the Labour Party will endorse a single candidate for the whole of Sussex. On the 1st of December 2011, Councillor Jones announced to a police authority meeting,
I shall be seeking my party's nomination for the office of Police and Crime Commissioner.
I thought at the time that that would probably involve a small number of party activists, some of whom might be friends of Jones, perhaps with head office having a hand in it, that they might or might not nominate more than one candidate. The Herald story introduces another strategy, which would be very unusual for a general election. Labour members across East and West Sussex will vote for their candidate in the spring by postal ballot. Given the Sussex voting figures for the last general election, I think that if the Conservative Party also backs a single candidate, voting for anyone else in Sussex could prove an empty gesture, unless there is at least one candidate that voters are in a position to judge as outstandingly able. Such a candidate might have to describe himself or herself as independent Conservative to have a good chance of success. That being said, we return to Richards' CV. Mr. Richards, who was Labour's parliamentary candidate for Lewis in 2001, is standing on a ticket of rights for victims of crime. He says he also wants to ensure budget cuts do not land on the most vulnerable, and to campaign against hate crimes against minorities such as the LGBT community, and hidden crimes such as domestic violence. He has pledged that if he wins, 1/3 of the salary will be donated to police and crime victims' charities, and is challenging the other candidates to do the same. Mr. Richards was an advisor to Labour cabinet ministers, including Hazel Blears MP, the former police minister. He is vice-chair of Eastbourne Labour Party, writes regular columns for Labour publications, and appears on radio and TV providing political commentary. This sounds like serious stuff. So I'm providing an example of Richards on national TV providing political commentary. On what was he asked to advise the nation? On the 21st of February 2012 at midday, BBC Two's Daily Politics appeared. Towards the end of the allotted hour, the chairperson introduced the last topic of the day, the way a government minister went across the road from his office to Downing Street.
Now, the short walk from Andrew Lansley's office to Downing Street yesterday turned into something of an ordeal.
An irate former Unison rep had accosted the architect of the new NHS. So a politically balanced threesome was asked to pronounce on the wisdom of Lansley's walking into Downing Street.
Well, we have three guests to discuss what should have been done. Penny Mordaunt, Conservative MP, Paul Richards, former spin doctor, and Mark Littlewood too. And let's, visualise. Number 10 is here. Richmond House, the department, is pretty well opposite, isn't it? You can see what's going on. Wouldn't you take a decision and say, do you know what, Andrew Lansley, let's go in the quiet way?
I wouldn't actually, because
Really?
I think that becomes a story in itself.
So you wouldn't have let him walk into that in the first place?
Correct. If I was advising Lansley, I would have said this is about the worst sort of coverage he can get for his reforms.
What would you have done, Paul?
Well, I wouldn't
Your
have allowed
minister.
it. Well, I wouldn't have allowed it to happen. And I've stood in that window on Richmond,
Really?
In Richmond House, looking over the road and advising the Secretary of State not to go anywhere near the
Well-
protesters outside. There's a perfectly good back door, or you go in through with the car.
Yeah.
But what you don't do is get hijacked in this way, and it looks terrible.
So our would-be candidate's advice is that a government minister should avoid the public by using the back door to number 10 or by being chauffeured there. The Daily Politics chairperson introduced Richards as a former spin doctor.
Paul Richards, former spin doctor.
You no doubt have your own ideas on what that term implies, but to add focus to the connotations you have acquired, I offer the following dictionary definition. Someone whose job is to make ideas, events, etc. seem better than they really are, especially in politics.